Hello, everyone, and welcome to Drop the Gloves with Wichita Thunder head coach Malcolm Cameron. Drop the Gloves is a weekly program where you, the fans, get to ask your questions about the Thunder, hockey, or sports in general, and you receive straight answers from the Wichita Thunder coach. In this week's episode, the coach discusses with us the tough officiating from the past weekend. He tells us why it's so difficult for players to reach such high point totals each season. And the coach explains to us why he believes the Kansas City Chiefs will beat the Pittsburgh Steelers this weekend. So let's get right to Drop the Gloves. Well, let's welcome back Coach Cameron this week. Coach, do you have team updates for us?
No, just that we added, obviously, David Friedman in a trade. He played this past weekend. And Zach O'Brien, who came back from Europe, get into our lineup Saturday night. Both good additions to the team, so we're very excited to have them.
Both got on the scoring sheet right out.
Both got on the score sheet, yeah. Both pretty nifty players. Have added back to our team speed, which is what we wanted. And I liked the speed of our lineup on Saturday night. I think was almost back to where it was at the beginning of the year when we had Rodwald, Krushelnyski, Rumble, and Gagne in it, so which were all fast players. So I like the direction we're heading.
Before we get into fan questions, I just want to talk about a few things with you. Earlier on in the season, you discussed with us a little bit about when the team gave up goals late, they seemed to kind of get a little fearful at that particular point. This last weekend, you're leading big time in both games, and they kind of battled back. Are you seeing that kind of attitude come back a little bit?
No, to be honest with you, I think we got hamstrung a little bit by the officiating, and I don't usually talk about it, but I think there was a couple of bad calls called on us in the third period, which gave them some momentum in the period. And usually the hockey gods, if you end up getting a bad call against you, usually end up coming back to bite you. And I think if we don't have that penalty, we don't get scored on, because we'd killed off all of theirs up to that point. And I think we would have closed out that game 4-2. And it's the same thing with the game on Saturday night. We should have won that game 4-1. Jamie Dornbosch gets slew-footed behind the net. He's knocked completely down, which should have been either a tripping call or a slew-footing call, and they score because he's laying on his back. So that goal should never have happened, and we close out that game 4-1. But 3 to 4 points this past weekend. We're back to scoring an average of over 3 goals a game again. We'll get better defensively. Drew Owsley's getting back in his groove. I feel very confident with this team right now, especially with the new additions and the attitude they've brought to this hockey club.
Talking about the officiating for a moment, and I know you don't want to be critical of that to any kind of major degree, but it was pretty tough this weekend. I mean, there were some calls that I thought that they should have had lots of penalties against them and just weren't getting them called. Is there a point where you kind of feel like you're not only against the opponent, but the officiating's against you as well?
Well, I certainly felt that way this weekend. I did. I think on Saturday, we didn't even take a penalty, like in terms of having to kill off a penalty to give them a power play. And I saw at least 3 that we deserved. Now, I saw 2 in the third period that we should have been on the power play for. One was the breakaway that DeBlau had. The guy completely reached around and grabbed him by the jersey and prevented him from getting a shot. And then the slew foot on Dornbosch that gave him their second goal. So, there's times when you feel like you're battling, but I'm not very critical of them because at the end of the day, it's a development league, and you're going to get, everybody knows you're going to get officiating that way, good sometimes, bad sometimes. It's usually bad for both teams or good for both teams, but I try and usually keep that to myself.
You talked about the offense getting a lot of productivity this last weekend. What are some things you're seeing in the offense?
Well, we've acquired some better offensive players, and I think guys are starting to bear down on their chances a little bit. You look at this past weekend, Eric Amp's got his first goal, Carlson got his first goal, Vince Arsenault got a goal, Loiseau broke out of his slump, Matt DeBlau, Tatchell, Jared Grant. So we're getting scoring from all 3 lines, and that's not putting pressure on one line to have to do all the scoring. All 3 lines scored on Saturday night.
Matt DeBlau seems like his game is really stepping up for you. Is he gaining more confidence from you?
For sure he is. And, with a young player, sometimes it's just finding his way, especially guys that play college hockey. They're used to playing just the 2 games in the weekend, so they've got a whole week to prepare. And but when you get into a heavier schedule, sometimes the college kids hit a wall because they've already played their year's games in half a season. So sometimes you just have to, you just got to battle through that and stay with guys. And I think Matt's done a great job, as is Blake Tatchell.
Well, let's head to our fan questions this week. We first of all begin with Jim from Wichita. He says he was at the game in Missouri Friday night, and was he wrong, or were the intermissions longer between periods? And if so, why were they able to do that?
Well, from time to time, you actually, they were 22 minutes long, which is 4 minutes longer than normal. And sometimes if you have a special promotion planned, you get approval from the league. We've done it here. When you have a special act that comes in, or you're showcasing something in particularly, but you have to have league approval to do that. And actually they did it again Saturday night too. So it makes for a long game, especially with a 7:30 start on Friday night. It made for a long night.
I think it was like 10:45 or something by the time it was over.
Yes.
Barry from Wichita asks, you play teams like Allen and Tulsa so frequently and play a lot of games in a very short time. He wonders if you see that the same type of mentality in those games is what you would have if you were facing a team in a 7-game playoff series, where it's harder to make adjustments because you become so familiar with one another.
Well, no, actually, I would prefer, again, Allen, Tulsa, Missouri, we play them a lot. I would prefer if it was spread out, a couple of times per month, as opposed to playing them like 4 times in a week and a half. I think sometimes you get stale in playing those types of teams. If one team's hot and the other team's weak because of call-ups or injuries, you're not getting the same type of performance. And then it's so different usually between month to month when you play those teams. But in playoff series, it's like a chess match. You'll do a lot of adjustments in your playoff series. So if you lose game 1, now you're going to make adjustments for game 2. You win game 2, you'll make adjustments going into game 3. So you're always making adjustments in playoffs. Probably not as much so, during the regular season as you would in the playoffs, just because you're more concerned in the regular season with your team's style of play and having a basic structure, a basic system. As you move towards playoffs, you're going to add a few things to keep teams on their toes.
I would think you'd add a lot of more emotion and passion to those games as they went along as well.
No question, yeah. There's no question.
Next up, we have Andrea from Derby. She says, did I hear right that Ryan Rupert's twin brother is playing for Indy against you guys Tuesday night?
Yes. His older twin brother by 10 minutes, as I found out today, is on the Indy team. So I know Ryan's looking forward to playing against him.
I bet he is. Jeremy from Wichita would like to know, how many games in a season do you no longer consider a first-year player to be a rookie?
20.
20, okay.
Yep. Because I believe this league gets better every year, and it gets better every 10 games. It does, just because the younger players become more comfortable, and other teams' rosters settle down, and you're getting guys back, and everything like that. So I think 20 games, usually the rookie players are now considered vets.
Hal would like to know, why does it seem that some teams or organizations always seem to stink? Like I look at the Cleveland Browns and to a lesser degree the Arizona Coyotes, they always seem to be struggling. Why don't these teams ever seem to get it going?
Well, that's a good question, and I've talked about this frequently, and I'll go back several years. You look at the Golden State Warriors were never a good team, or the Washington Bullets or Wizards or whatever they're called now. And the LA Clippers in basketball. Those are 3 teams that have been poor for so long. Toronto Maple Leafs in hockey, Arizona recently. A lot of it has to do with management and drafting in those leagues. If your scouts don't hit the right guys at the right time, that could set you back 3 or 4 or 5 years. It takes you 3 or 4 years of bad drafting to have a 10-year bad stretch. Because your first round picks are supposed to be mainstays in your lineup for at least 10 years. You look at them. So if you miss out 3 years in a row in drafting in the first round, you're setting yourself up for a poor decade. And that's typically what happens. Or, not having continuity. All of a sudden you have a couple of bad seasons, but you're trending in the right direction, and you get rid of your coach and your management and the scouts and everything, and then bam, you bring in new guys. So, you look at some of these NFL teams or any sports teams, guys going through 5 coaches in 5 years. You can never get a continuity. You can never get into a rhythm. So a lot of those things leads to that.
One of the interesting things I find is that hockey seems to be unique in the fact that a new coach can take a team that's struggling and turn them around instantaneously. That doesn't seem to go on as much in other sports.
No, but usually even in hockey, like a The Pittsburgh thing was an anomaly. Typically, you're never going to see that. I mean, typically, you'll see a team maybe go on a 5-game jump because of new voice, whatever it happens to be, and then they'll go back to being the way they are. Leopard can change its spots, but only for a short period of time. And that's typically what happens. If you look at the trend of any sport where a coach gets fired, say mid-season or anything like that, they'll go good for a while, but then they'll settle back into what they are.
Eric from Andover would like to know, that Columbus Blue Jacket streak was incredible. How do you think it takes, or what do you think it takes for a team to win that many games in a row?
Well, I was fortunate to be in part of a league record here in the ECHL of 23 games without a loss.
Wow.
So I think South Carolina tied that record a couple of years back. And thinking back to that, it comes from your leadership group and holding people accountable and making sure guys don't change the way they play. Human nature is to take shortcuts when you have success, right? You win 10 in a row, and then all of a sudden you're not as hungry for that 11th win as you were to get the first win. And I liken it back to my economics days in university, where there's this thing called the theory of utility. And my teacher used to use Big Macs as an example. That first Big Mac you eat, boy, it tastes so good. But then every one after that just doesn't taste quite as good. And you don't have quite the same appetite for it. So it's hard to win. When you get on a big streak like that, and it's a Wednesday night game, and you're tired and everything like that. So you got to have real character people and good leadership to keep those streaks going.
Oh, interesting. Vic from Wichita would like to know, I look at the statistics of guys like Gretzky and Lemieux who had like 200-point seasons. Now if a guy hits 100, it's a lot. Were those guys just that good, or is it much more difficult to score now?
It's more difficult to score now because the players are better athletes. The players are better overall. The coaching is better. In the National Hockey League, you look back when Gretzky and Lemieux, more Gretzky because he's older, broke into the league. Sometimes NHL teams only had one coach. They didn't even have an assistant. Now you're looking at 3 assistants, 4 assistants, and a head coach, and video up the yin-yang, and the technology that they have. Players are just more well prepared, and the goaltenders are better. They play a different style. They're bigger. They're more athletic. They take up more of the net. So the scoring is never going to go up to what it was in the 80s or even early 90s. And it's more because of the technology, the coaching, and the players are better athletes.
Next, we have Quinn from Salina. He says, as competitive as a guy as you are, I am wondering what you think of participation trophies. Isn't that just making our youth feel entitled?
I do agree with that in a sense, yes. I think the hardest thing now is, in this day and age, that kids are so wrapped up into technology. I mean, you're seeing 10-year-old kids with iPhones, and where's their head all the time? It's down in their phone. So parents want to keep their kids in sports, because it's a good outlet for life, to be self-sufficient and good teammates and learn how to share and be part of a team environment. That in order to keep them interested, sometimes you have to reward them. So it's kind of a catch-22 situation. My 9-year-old son now, he's ultra competitive. To get a participation ribbon means nothing to him. He wants to win. He wants a gold trophy or a gold medal. But not every kid is like that. If you want to keep your kids in sports, sometimes you feel like you have to reward them and give them that. And that's a tough question to ask. Me in my day, I would never have agreed with that. I think competition breeds excellence and makes people rise to the top and makes them, strive and persevere to be a champ. A 7th place participation ribbon did nothing for me. But I could see nowadays, where the technology and all the distractions that comes with being a kid, you have to make them feel good about themselves in order to stay in sports.
Do you think that there's an age limit that you kind of break that off at?
Yeah, I think once they hit 14, 30, once they hit to be teenagers, I think that's the time you stop. But, right up until they become teenagers, I think participation and making them feel like they're important and that they did well and they competed hard, that's also important too. But it's no saying giving a 14-year-old a 7th place ribbon for showing up.
Absolutely. Our next question comes from Trey from McConnell Air Force Base. He says, a player for the New York Giants punched a wall after losing Sunday. Extreme competitiveness or spoiled brat?
I didn't see it, so it would depend on the scenario. If he's mad at himself because he made a boo-boo, I would call that extreme competitiveness. If it's because they lost and they just didn't compete hard enough, or he was blaming it on somebody else or was mad at a teammate, I would call it a spoiled brat. So it would depend on the situation, and since I didn't see it, I couldn't really say, but it could be either one of those things depending on the scenario.
Our last question coming from Chiefs fan this week. He says, who do you see prevailing in the Chiefs-Steelers game?
Well, since I live here now, I got to say for the Chiefs. I was a huge Steelers fan back in the 70s, but since switched my allegiance to the Seattle Seahawks once Franco Harris left the Steelers back in '84 and went to the Seahawks, so I never forgiven him since. So go Chiefs, go.
Thanks for joining us this week, Coach.
Anytime.
We want to thank Coach Cameron for joining us on Drop the Gloves this week. If you have your own questions you'd like to ask the Wichita Thunder coach, please send them to us at malcolmcameron@minorleaguesportsreport.com. That's malcolmcameron@minorleaguesportsreport.com. Please have your questions to us by Monday evening so we can give the coach a little time to review them before we record the show. I'm Rob Paneer, the managing editor of the Minor League Sports Report, and we'll see you next time on